All right, good morning, everyone. I hope you're all having an amazing Saturday morning. I'm here with special guest Matthew Nagra this morning. We're going to be talking about soy myth, soy as a protein source, or just protein overall. So Matthew is a naturopathic doctor. He's plant-based, he's an athlete, and he's a volunteer for nutritionfacts.org. He's just a wealth of knowledge when it comes to plant-based nutrition. So I'm really excited to have him on and share with you guys and just breaking down the myth about soy products. I know it's a question that I get often. How much is too much? Should I even be eating soy? Is it even a good source of protein? So I'm really excited to dive deep into that today. So Matthew, thank you very much for taking the time to jump on this video. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Good. I'll just say it's funny to refilm it because we just recorded a podcast. If you guys need to go listen to that. So yeah, man, let's dive into it. Soy as a myth. Is soy good or bad for us?
I mean, the data we have on soy is overwhelmingly positive. Of course, there are a lot of myths out there, a lot of concerns that the public has that largely stem from the fact that soy, they contain these phytoestrogens, these plant estrogens in them, and people often think that means it's all of a sudden estrogenic. That's going to cause breast cancer, lead to gynecomastia in men, and that kind of thing. But that's just simply not the case. So these phytoestrogens are up to 1/1000th the strength of our own endogenous estrogens that we produce, or even the estrogens you might find in, say, dairy products. So they're very weak estrogens. On top of that, they bind to specific receptors in our body known as estrogen receptor beta or beta receptors that exert specific effects in different areas of the body. So, for example, in breast tissue, these beta receptors can lead to anti-estrogenic effects. So it actually does the opposite of what estrogen would normally do, right? Estrogen in breast tissue promotes the growth of tissue and potentially breast cancer, whereas anti-estrogenic effects would do the opposite. In bone tissue, for example, which are concentrated with those beta receptors, you have pro-estrogenic effects, which can lead to greater bone mineral density. So it can actually be good for bone health. And so these are just a couple ideas that often get mixed up, or some details that get missed altogether. On top of that, we have data on rodents, which is often what gets thrown around, showing that when you feed rodents very high concentrations of these phytoestrogens, they run into problems. So they can lead to all sorts of health issues. But I mean, for one, we're not rats, and second, we don't consume these phytoestrogens in their isolated form. Typically, we consume them in the form of soy. We're getting much lower concentrations of them.
I had a question. Question for that. So, obviously, they isolated that compound. So, for the amount that they gave them, how much soy, how much tofu does that? It's must be an insane amount.
Yeah, it's like it would be next to or close to basically a soy predominant diet.
Okay.
You'd be getting a good bulk of your calories, most of your protein from soy itself.
Okay.
Yeah, the exact number I have calculated previously. I don't have it offhand, but it's a lot.
Okay.
If you wanted a relative answer. Now, I mean, on top of that, we do have 2 case studies of men who happen to consume ridiculous amounts of soy. So in the ballpark of, it was 14 up to 20 or 12 to 20 servings of soy a day. And they may have had some negative hormonal effects from it, possibly. It's a big possibly, because we don't know for sure. We can't prove it one way or the other, given that they were just a couple case studies. But possibly at that level, we're eating, again, a soy predominant diet, maybe you run into issues. However, we have data on, at this point, millions of people across Asia, Europe, America, and otherwise, suggesting that soy is overwhelmingly positive for human consumption. So, I mean, in 2020, I believe it was February 2020, we had an umbrella review published. And this is looking at all the data on soy. So they took 114 meta-analyses, looking at 43 different health outcomes. They put it all into one publication, and they actually found that greater soy consumption was associated with lower risk of breast cancer, endometrial cancer, ovarian cancer, colorectal cancer, stomach cancer, lung cancer, even prostate cancer, cardiovascular disease, stroke, heart disease, diabetes, reduced blood pressure, reduced cholesterol levels, even for menopause, helped with certain menopausal symptoms, at least in the form of the phytoestrogens themselves. So it was just positive after positive after positive after positive. Now, there was one risk that they found, and that was they found that miso possibly increased the risk of stomach cancer. And that's actually because miso is very high in salt, or very high in sodium. So it's not actually the soy doing it, it's the fact that it's really high in sodium, and high sodium intake can increase stomach cancer risk, which is actually something not a lot of people know, right? They always think about blood pressure with regard to sodium, not so much the stomach cancer risk. So again, very positive across the board. They also looked at hormone levels, and again, they found that there wasn't any change in like estrogen or testosterone levels, or even not a clinically relevant change in TSH or thyroid levels as well. So again, just positive. Now in December, so just a month and a half, 2 months ago, we had a meta-analysis of trials on soy feeding in men. And they were looking at hormone levels, again, estrogen, testosterone, and other hormones. And they found that there was no change in hormone levels. And if anything, at the highest consumption of soy phytoestrogens, the isoflavones, that would equate to about a block a day, or just under a block a day of tofu, they found that if anything, it actually trended towards higher testosterone levels by a little bit. I wouldn't say it really does change levels at all, but just it's certainly not reducing your testosterone levels. We can say that.
It's a testosterone booster. Everyone's
exactly. I mean, no, don't take me as saying that. That's not the case. It's just showing that the claims that it's going to reduce your testosterone are certainly false. So again, like the data is just overwhelmingly positive in humans. And in fact, going back to breast cancer, which is a concern, even in women who are at risk. So women with the gene mutations, BRCA1 or 2 gene mutations that put them at higher risk of breast cancer, if they consume more soy, they reduce the risk. Even women who are currently battling or have previously battled breast cancer, it may improve survival rates. So soy just becomes a beneficial food across the board, and it's super nutritious, high in protein, high in calcium a lot of the times, especially fortified, and other minerals as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because when my fiance got diagnosed, right, there was this big myth of like she can't have any soy at all, and then like we dove deeper and then look at some of the research that that you've put out on your Instagram and on your blog, and I'm like, oh shit, it's actually beneficial, right? It would actually help her.
And I get patients who are told by their doctor a lot of the time to avoid soy, and that just kind of comes back to the fact that they clearly haven't looked at the data. It's not only is that not good advice, I would say it's harmful advice. If someone's eating soy and you remove it from their diet, if anything, you're gonna increase the risk compared to if they were consuming it. So it's just not good advice there at all, really. And I mean, on a protein point, because I know that's what we were talking about earlier today, we have a meta-analysis looking at trials of soy protein consumption versus other protein sources. So either just animal protein as a whole or whey protein specifically, and no difference in outcomes at all. Pretty well identical in every measure. And soy protein is actually one that ranks very high on a scale of digestibility. So protein digestibility, meaning that on basically any measure you can come up with, it is equivalent to other protein sources.
Yeah, I find it interesting because when we did go for a doctor for her diagnosis at first, like they did say cut out soy products, but like you can eat chicken. So hormone-filled chicken is a better alternative than soy. Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it's just. I mean, it's not their fault or anything. It's just they haven't been exposed to that data. They, unless they're looking into it on their own, they're obviously not going to have a lot of knowledge around that.
Yeah. So in terms of quantities, that's a question I get often. Yeah. Like, how much soy is too much per day, right? Because we talked about a serving size, which is around like 100 grams, right?
Yeah,
like
sometimes 85 grams of tofu could be a serving, but yeah, roughly around there, and then 1 cup of soy milk typically.
Okay. And like I probably consume like 4 or 5, 6 of those per day.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, how much do you consume per day? Like,
I'm probably about the same. Like I'll have a full block of tofu and at least a cup or 2 of soy milk in my like smoothies and things. I'm probably up around like 4 or 5 servings a day for sure.
Okay, and first thing to notice, we're fine.
Yeah,
we're fit, healthy individuals. But just like on a general basis for anyone listening in, like what would be considered too much? Like where should you cap it?
So we don't really have solid data on that right now because we don't have people eating that much, right? Other than those couple case studies I mentioned, there's actually a new case study that just came out on the soy milk diet. It was literally like a soy milk and oat diet. That was their whole diet, just ridiculous. And so I mean, potentially issues at that level of intake where you're eating almost all soy, but at the amounts that people typically eat, I know we definitely have data up to like 3 or even more servings a day being totally fine and actually leading to great health outcomes, so being beneficial. We have no reason to believe that 4, 5, 6 servings a day is going to be harmful either. But what I would like to mention, and that we mentioned earlier as well, is that we want diversity in a diet, right? We don't want someone eating all of one fruit. We don't want you eating too much, just one type of fruit. We want you to vary that. We don't want you to eat just one vegetable every day. No, you'll mix it up. Same thing with soy foods, super healthy, great source of nutrition. But just to diversify your nutrition a little bit, it's always good to try to pick from different areas. Have some lentils, have some beans, have some soy as well. So I'm not worried from a health perspective if someone wants to have a full block of tofu at all. But I just would like to see more diversity in a diet, just because it varies nutrition a little bit, may be better for gut microbiome based on the limited data we have right now, and certainly not going to be detrimental.
Yeah, because you mentioned earlier, I think in the podcast, which we're referring to a lot.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, go listen.
Go listen to it. Yeah, so it'll be out. Actually, this is going to come out this Saturday. So it's going to come out next Thursday, the podcast. But it was cost of something. Let's say you have a certain amount of food per day that you get to eat, yep. Right? If you take 50% of it from soy products, then you're only left with the other 50%, right? So soy is only going to take a small percentage of your daily intake. So having a bit of tofu for dinner, having a bit of tempeh in your Buddha bowl at night, a few pieces of edamame in there, that's not going to do you any harm, right?
No. Like I'm not. Yeah, I'm not worried at all about people overeating soy. I mean, that's unless again you're going to this soy diet, like I meant. Yeah, you're not gonna be overeating soy. I would like to see people vary their diets more for the health benefits you get from eating a diet that has whole grains, fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, seeds. Picking from all those different groups and mixing it up is just possibly going to lead to a better overall gut health more than anything else. And just make sure you're really hitting those nutrient targets.
Yeah, because variety is really important for gut health. And it was Will, I can't say his last name.
Yeah. Dr. B.
Dr. B. Yeah. So I know he has a lot of great information. I ordered his book actually. It's going to be added to the bookshelf behind me. Because one of the main things is people's like, I'm not eating enough protein on a vegan diet, right? They're always scared that they're not eating enough. So maybe we can dive into that. Like what would be, obviously there's a range of what would be an appropriate amount for people to eat depending on their level of activity. But what does that look like? So people don't think they have to eat 300 grams of protein per day.
Yeah. Well, for starters, vegans actually on average, based on data we have, consume more protein per body weight than meat eaters because they tend to be leaner, right? They're less likely to be overweight or obese. And so it's easier to hit your targets because they're based on your weight. Now, as for weight, look, if we're looking to maximize strength gains, then you're looking at 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So if you're about a 140 pound person, then you convert that to kilograms, that ends up being about 100 grams or so of protein a day. If you weigh less than that, it's going to be less. If you weigh more than that, it's going to be more. But 1.6 is the target for maximizing strength gains if you're, of course, strength training in that. Now, the minimum that's typically recommended for a sedentary individual, so somebody who's not very active, is going to be 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight.
Which is not a lot per day.
Yeah, that's nothing. It's absolutely nothing. And then for elderly individuals, it goes up a little bit just because they absorb less protein overall. And then for like endurance athletes, you're looking at probably in the ballpark 1.2, 1.4 grams, maybe even a little less grams per kilogram of body weight.
Interesting because we obviously you volunteer for nutritionfacts.org. So Michael Greger, right, his book How Not to Diet, when they talked about really bright in here, overexposed, how not to diet. There was a study on strength training and retention and building lean muscle mass, and they found that as you go into deficit, like eating like too much protein won't make a big difference unless you're adding strength training is going to be a key factor in helping you retain lean muscle. Even if you're going to deficit and you're eating a lot of protein, if you're not strength training, you're not going to maximize anything.
Yeah, I mean, well, no, that goes for most things, right? If you're just sitting on your butt and you start packing in the protein, you think you're going to put on mass. It's not really going to happen to any measurable degree. If you want to gain muscle, you got to work out and make sure you have a good diet, right? You can't do one or the other.
Yeah, it goes hand in hand for people listening. So we have this range, right? Like the 1.2 to 1.6 for people to be aiming in. Obviously, this is per kg of body weight.
Yeah.
Is there an equation or a metric for lean body mass? Right, because obviously if someone is 300 pounds, then that number is going to be higher, but it doesn't need to be that high.
Yeah. So there is, it's by the sports medicine. I can't remember the organization, but they actually reviewed all the data on that. They have a calculation for it. I believe it was around 2.2 grams or 2.5 grams. It was somewhere in that ballpark. Sorry, I don't recall off the top of my head. I don't typically use that calculation. It actually would be a more useful calculation for a lot of cases. Just the issue is not everybody knows their lean mass, right? Not everybody has calculated their body fat percentage using like DEXA scan or even other less precise measurements. So from a population standpoint, it's not as useful, right? Like if I'm gonna be advising my patients on what their protein target should be, for example, I don't have a DEXA scan in office. I mean, I could use calipers or something if I wanted to and get like a rough estimate or that, but it's just not as useful. But again, that is a really important point you just made. If we're talking about individuals with, say, obesity, the calculation is not going to be best suited to them. But from again, it goes to like average population, just like BMI, right? BMI is a measure of, total body weight, but typically used to measure body fat and its impact on health on a population level. Yes. And on a population level, based on averages and that, it's actually pretty solid for telling us what someone's disease risk will be. Yeah. But on an individual basis, if you're really athletic, if you are, if you're a bodybuilder, for example, you'll appear obese on a BMI scale.
I was laughing because I was obese when I was bodybuilding because of my BMI, because of my weight.
Yeah, exactly. So there are certain cases, you have to know where it applies and where it doesn't. And that goes for both the BMI and that goes for your protein requirements as well.
Yeah. Just because like obviously with my members, my program, I have their body fat percentage. Yeah. So it's a little bit more accurate. And there is like certain cases where it wouldn't apply to do that. That's why I'm curious for some people listening that are like, in the obese category, like that's like 250 grams of protein for me, right? So there's another equation, there's another metric to be more accurate. So perfect, man. So we covered like how much protein people should be aiming for, and we covered obviously like the soy and the actual benefits from it, because people's main fear that I'm sure you hear all the time is women is like, I don't want to have too much estrogen, right? I have fear of breast cancer. And men is, I don't want to boost my estrogen level because I don't want man boobs, right? That's a huge one that comes up in my conversations. So those are like the main two fears that people have. And we address both of those. Obviously, like boosting estrogen in the body can come in other forms, right? If you're drinking milk, if you're eating animal products, plastic containers, right? They're non-BPA friendly, like all that.
Yeah, a little
small percentage, but it plays into it because gynecomastia is something that's more prevalent now compared to like in the previous years, right? Like more men are finding themselves having like man boobs, basically.
I mean, it's funny when that just brought me to something to think about for a second. But it's funny because with phytoestrogens, there's a lot of fear around soy, but there's no fear around beer. And the hops in beer has a type of phytoestrogen that actually binds to those alpha receptors that may have pro-estrogenic effects. I mean, and I mean, maybe there's a link there as well, but like alcohol consumption is associated with breast cancer risk and that, although that's alcohol itself, mind you, whether or not beer actually has a greater risk, I haven't quite looked into, but it's just one of those things where oftentimes, and not always, but oftentimes, beer is seen as like a manly drink or whatever, and soy milk isn't. And whereas really you're getting the pro-estrogenic effects possibly from the beer versus anti-estrogenic effects, at least with regard to breast tissue, from the soy milk.
Yeah. It's not great marketing for beer companies. It boosts your estrogen.
Yeah, exactly.
I see why they're not promoting it that way. No, that's awesome, man. Well, I really appreciate your time. That we spent an hour and a half together now with the podcast, so I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day. I will link all of Dr. Matthew's links down below for Instagram, YouTube, your blog, because I know you have some amazing blog posts about soy products. And you guys check him out on Instagram. A lot of useful information. He's always on there sharing, providing value. Anything you want to add before we wrap up the video?
No, I mean, as I mentioned with the podcast, might as well do it again. For individuals who ask me, because I do get asked fairly often, I am accepting patients in British Columbia, so long as you're based in BC, over either telemedicine or in person in my clinic in Vancouver. And if you have any questions regarding some of the stuff we discussed today or around any of my content on Instagram, you can send me a message or comment. I'm pretty good at getting back to you, so I was happy to interact that way.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, man. And then for everyone listening, be sure to like the video, subscribe so you get notified when we do post a new video. And I hope you guys all have an amazing weekend.